Welcome to Ministry Pivot. Reverend Russ, again, back with another episode, with another time to be with you all talking about Pivot. Hopefully, it's been engaging in the past couple weeks. Today, we're talking about the pivot of connection, and I have some friends, some colleagues on the line, and I am super excited to have them here. Going to introduce each of them, and then they'll talk a little bit more about who they are and how they arrived at the space where they currently are in ministry. We have Pastor Larry Brey.
Yeah, you got it. Well done.
I'm checking. He is a pastor at Elevation Church, actually one of the founding pastors and families there. He'll talk more about himself. We also have Pastor Bobby Manning, who is the pastor of First Baptist Church of District Heights. And we also have Reverend Candice Wynn, who is a youth ministry expert, as well as a specialist with Orange in Atlanta. So thank y'all for being on today. We're talking about Ministry Pivot. And as we said a minute ago, I do want to give you all a second to kind of just talk a little bit more about yourself, ministry, kind of how you serve, where you serve, how you arrived at where you are. And Reverend Candice, if you, as the roles, can go first.
All right. So as Reverend Russ said, I'm Candice. Originally, actually, Bobby, I'm actually from our great nation's capital. That's where I was born and raised. Yep, that's where I was born and raised. And that's right. I left when I was 18 and never went back.
No, we need to fix that.
But I live in Atlanta, and it's a beautiful place to be. But I've been in children and youth ministry for, I guess, children and youth ministry together. I guess I served in that area for probably, I don't know, about 7-8 years or so. But youth ministry in total, 14 years. I've served in different churches throughout the Southeast. And I currently, as Rev Russ said, serve as an Orange specialist with Orange. And I have the privilege of working with churches and youth pastors throughout the world, literally doing teaching and training opportunities. It's truly such a beautiful opportunity to be able to pour into those who are pouring into the next generation. I love the work that I do. I spend a lot of my time just coaching and consulting people, and most recent months, my conversations have been about what do we do amid all that's going on. There's a lot that's happening, and been walking with a lot of churches through some of that stuff.
Love it.
Awesome. Pastor Larry.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for letting me be a part of this conversation. I feel like I'm swimming in deep water with these experts. I mean, you called Reverend Candice a youth expert. So I'm like, I don't know if I've ever been an expert on anything other than food and my 4 kids. It's really all I'm an expert on.
You have 4 kids, brother. You are a youth expert as well.
No, that's right. Exactly. We need to be listening to you talk about that.
Exactly. What not to do. But I'm a part of a ministry that we started 15 years ago. Started in Charlotte, North Carolina. We've over the last 15 years, God's really been good to us, and we've got 21 different physical locations throughout the Southeast, and then an online presence that's ministering in many different communities. And my background's actually in PT sports medicine. And so before the whole church thing, I was a college professor, physical therapist, athletic trainer. And so if anybody's watching this thing that doesn't feel like they're quite qualified to be at the table, let me tell you, like, you're in good company, because, man, I love how God will use all your experiences and the things you never thought you would need. Like, man, like the care we're providing for our people right now, the lessons I'm implementing are the ones I learned when I was physically caring for people, because it's the same thing.
That's awesome. Thanks, Pastor Bobby.
Yeah, let me first say how honored I am, echo Larry's statements, and just being on this incredible panel with you great leaders. For all of you, Candice and Larry and Russ, your names and your reputations echo throughout the modern church. And so I'm grateful to be listed among you guys. My name is Pastor Bobby. I grew up here in the DMV, born and raised, and served. I attended and served at one of the largest mega churches here in the DC area for many years until about 9.5 years ago. The Lord called me to an established church that was small, about 40 folks, and since then just been pastoring that church and seeing us grow and change culture and build on what the Lord had been doing in that church for a half a century before I got there. And so very grateful and very excited to see what the Lord's doing, but also incredibly humbled and kind of scared to death as we traverse these waters as global pandemic has changed how we express the local church. Yeah. And I'm looking forward to learning probably more than I have much to offer today. Grateful to be hanging out with y'all tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Glad to have you. So let me start it, and I'm gonna stick with you, Bobby, and then we'll kind of roll around. But the question is, what are two? So we're talking about pivot, right? We're talking about shifts. We're talking about changes. And Pastor Larry and I were talking yesterday, and I want him to share kind of some of his thoughts on what that means that churches have to do, and if they don't do, they may end up dying. But I'm not going to take it all because it was really good, Pastor. I heard you as you were talking. But Pastor Bobby, what are two pivots, or what are two things that have changed in the way you connect? So connecting, right? I remember the day. I've been saying it in every episode of this joint. I remember it was the second Sunday in March, and had somebody told me the second Sunday in March was going to be the last Sunday, there's a African American church axiom that talks about if that was the last Sunday I knew I could have shook them and rock them, I would have shook them. And I remember that joint as being the last. It was the last one, and since then the way we connected has been different. And so I want to ask. I'm gonna throw it around for everybody, but Pastor Bobby, I want to start with you. What are two ways that connection looks different now?
Yeah, so off the bat, everybody knows this one, that if you were not already proficient at having an online expression, you were light years behind on the second Sunday in March. Yeah. And so we had to make a shift in making sure that we were proficient in our online worship experience. Just making sure that people could participate in worship was a hill for all churches to climb. Now, praise God, there were some churches who were already there and had that in place. For us, it was okay. We had it in place, but I don't know if you guys had this experience. For us, our online audience was always. And I say this to my own detriment and maybe even to my own shame. Our online audience had been, prior to COVID, a secondary thought for us. Meaning we were creating the entire experience for the people who were in the room, and we were allowing the online audience to be a fly on the wall. Hey, y'all couldn't make it, so I guess you can watch online. And so we immediately had to make sure we were shifting language and then thinking through every aspect of the online worship experience to make sure that we're doing it with the online audience as primary rather than secondary. And so that has taught us now that even, when the Lord shows us grace and COVID lifts and we get, to worship in person again, whatever that looks like, because I don't know if it'll look the same as it looked before. It taught us that that's a very important lesson that I wish we would have learned way before we had to, and the numbers should have bared it out for us, because there's a certain amount of people who are in the building, and that number is multiplied exponentially of the people who are observing online, by and large, in church in 2020. Another part is just always, as we've been preaching and teaching and communicating, is that the church is not just the Sunday expression. And it's so important for us to think through how people connect outside of just the Sunday expression. And what does that mean? And what does that look like? And how do we do discipleship? And how do we do life groups? And now, if everybody's talking about what they wish they had known before the second Sunday in March, I wish I would have invested in Zoom. I just bought some Zoom stock in February. I might not be on this call right now.
You wouldn't have had time for us. I hear you, brother.
No, it's us trying to figure out, okay, how do we make sure that people don't get lonely and isolated when you are forced to be isolated, sheltered in place? And so making sure, you start hearing these terms called where we say, I'm feeling zoomed out.
Yeah.
And now we have to, traverse these waters of, hey, we want to offer something that is helpful, and Zoom is a great tool, but people who are working in corporate America, they've been on Zoom from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And now you talk about getting into Bible study or getting into a life group, getting into discipleship at 7 p.m. on Zoom. And they like, man, please, I'm trying to turn this computer off. And so we're trying to figure all of those things out. But these are connection points that we've been having to think all the way through over the past few months.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. Reverend Candice, I know you're not at a specific church, but you deal with a ton of churches. So I can only imagine what you all heard. What did you all hear?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask Pastor Larry to go first, just to I was hoping that you were going to go that way. Primarily, and I'm saying that more so because it's just my role and in the ways that I have. I guess my perspective is a little bit different because I'm, like you said, I'm not necessarily connected with one church in this capacity of leadership. I'm connected with more so just a lot of different churches, and then also I specialize in the area of youth ministry. I'm not necessarily saying I'm an expert, like you was said before, but that's just my specialty, So I walk with a lot of youth ministries, and it's just interesting to me the ways that. So, say if a church was struggling initially in those capacities of connecting digitally to people that were not necessarily in the room, if the church at large was struggling in that way, then the children in the youth ministries, they're on life support. They're just so far behind. And there's some leaders that I've talked with who have lost their jobs. They have not been able to connect. In the beginning, everyone was tremendously excited about just this whole Zoom. A lot of students were excited about connecting, via Zoom, just something different. A month in, numbers started plummeting. I would say about 90% of the leaders, youth pastors that I talk with, are saying that their students are just not engaged and are just kind of really disconnected. And not a lot of ministries, sometimes the summer months are kind of, waffling a little bit anyway. But even now more so too. So for me right now, and I'm sure I'll talk a little bit deeper about this a little bit later, I think it's a great opportunity for churches to do a tremendous job of equipping families to families and guardians, parents, whomever, to shepherd and to worship within their homes together. And I'll just leave it at that right now before we don't get too deep into that right now. I think it's a little bit too soon. But I do think there's a tremendous opportunity right now for churches to do that. Yeah. And I think that some churches have made that shift tremendously well. And again, some are just, struggling to do that because they might not necessarily have had the resources and the means together initially, So now it's just that same situation.
No, that's great. And that's exactly why I asked you, because I knew you dealt with church.
Yeah.
And you were going to hear it, because our church is a church that uses some orange curriculum. And I know the first thing I had my leaders call, my nursery kid and my kids people call, was to say, hey, what are they moving online so we can use it?
That's right.
So that's why I asked the question. That's good.
Yeah. Well, I want to echo what Reverend Candice just said. I mean, the last day we had church was my oldest 14th birthday.
Wow.
And so seeing a 14-year-old starving for relational connection, and to know that it's in a pastor's house, like what's happened to the average family out there? But what happened on that second week of March is the church world hit the pause button. And the pause was, how long is it going to be until we go back to what we used to do? And the pivot is to hit eject. It's not pause any longer. And the churches that wait longer to hit eject on old philosophies, old ways of doing it, are going to die. They're not going to make it.
There you go.
The pivot that our ministry is going through, it's like, So, these are some of the notes you send over because you're so prepared, Reverend Russ. And so, but here's what every staff on a church has got to do. They got to start with a blank page. So here's the pivot. How do we become something we've never been? In order to see God do something we've never seen, we've got to become something we've never been. But the church world is resisting it because we're hitting pause because I like doing all this. So I'm just going to wait till this blows over, but I won't minister to the community because I'm unwilling to become this. I think that's happening right now in the church world. You mentioned this earlier, Dr. Bob. You said the expression of the local church and what you see represented in all of our different churches is different models, different ways of doing ministry, different expressions of it, but it's the same ecclesia. The way we all defined it March 14th is very different than how we're going to define it August 14th. But if we don't have a new way of doing it, because so many of us are thinking that the pause is just a bridge to get through it. No, this is a new roadmap on how to do it. And so we're working as a ministry to say, how do we rewrite everybody's job descriptions within the ministry? Because if we don't force change, people won't change. We all know that. And so that's the pivot that we're looking at as a ministry.
I just lost everybody.
Oh, you still there?
I am.
We see you.
We're here. We can see you.
I got all of the pivot. I got the pivot, but then it just went out.
Okay.
Devil
can't slow us down though.
Say it again.
Devil ain't gonna slow us down. Technology.
No, it's not. I have no idea, but it's not. We're gonna keep moving. But no, so let me pick up from what I heard and ask you this question, because you talked about the blank sheet, right? Yeah. But I think the issue is, and I think I appreciate that, and that was one of the things that you and I spoke about on the phone. But I think the issue is that not too many pastors, or leaders talk to other leaders. Right. They want to assume we did one of these on pivoting your outreach, and Pastor Tony Lee was on it, and he was like, pastors don't call for help. He was like, but in this season, if you don't call for help, you're going to die. Right. If you don't call for help in this season, you're going to die. You're not going to make it through. But to Pastor Larry, I want to push, because I told you I want this to be more of a how for some people. Right. Yeah. If you aren't used to working on the blank sheet, how do you start? Because everybody knows, right? As you work on a blank sheet, you're not sure what's going to come when you finish. So you have to have some checkpoints. You have to have some marks. You have to have some other people that you're speaking with, some other things that you're looking at. I know for us at our church, at Kingdom, shout out my pastor, Watley. I know for us at our church, he encouraged and empowered me to not just look at church. And so I was looking at other industries and other areas, and I'm still doing it. As of this recording, whether you're watching or listening, I think we're all trying to see how the NBA does this bubble thing to see if that really works. Because there's some key findings if what they do works well, that we can shift. But Pastor Larry, I'm going to push it back, and then anybody else can answer it as well. The question around how, so if a major pivot was rewriting job descriptions, rewriting where people were. We did the same thing at our church. We actually beefed up our social media and we beefed up our outreach because there are a ton of people who are needing help, who are hurting. And so we really literally made a pivot of our resources. But if you're a pastor who's not really used to using that white sheet of paper to kind of create it, you're used to doing, because you look at your annual year, and every church I think does this, where they look and say, okay, it's time to plan for the year, and all you do this year is plan what you did last year, but call it something different. How do you, what's some advice or some thoughts on first steps with starting with that white sheet?
Yeah, I love the question because it frames it in a place that all of us can take a step with it. And the size of the step is not determined by the size of the ministry.
Very good.
And some of the most impactful ministries that are going to watch these things are not numerically large. Because significance is always measured by our ability to influence the communities. And so practically what we did as a ministry, we reallocated about 60% of our staff, that the role they were doing by the end of March was a different job description than what they did at the beginning.
Wow.
Some of those things practically were, we took somebody who might have been involved in, running events at our locations or running children's ministry. Because the reality is we're not doing children's ministry. We're not doing events. We're not doing production. So rather than hit pause on that, we redirected them to say, now what you're going to do is you're going to call first-time guests, you're going to call families, and this is your new job. And now we're going to coach you on how to win in your new role. And for a lot of people, all of us like change until we have to change. Everybody's for reaching the community until you tell me I got to do something different. But my willingness to reach the community is my willingness to walk through personal pain and dying to personal preference. That's the hardest part about moving to the blank page, is I'm addicted to my preference.
That's good.
And I like doing what I like to do. So I write the job description, what I want versus what the community needs. We, in our context of ministry, we put a ton of value on the weekend worship experience.
Yeah.
And what it's easy for us in our context of ministry to worship is execution on the weekend. Now you're not executing on the weekend. What's the Win Now ministry?
Yeah.
It's got to be Monday through Saturday. It's not just about the Sunday anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so practically we sat down and said, okay, what do we need to be for the community? Not what do we want to do within my job?
No, that's good. That's good. That's really good.
Yeah. I think, I want to get in on this. This is really, really good. I think that, you're absolutely right, Larry. I agree with you 100%. I think for me, in that it will be, where do you start looking at the purpose of the church and the purpose of your church, and redefine what it is that you're doing in order to meet that purpose, right? For me, it kind of, everything, this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier, and I didn't say because I didn't want to jump in too soon, but we're going all in, all gas, no brakes, right? So on Easter Sunday, I had this major revelation, right? That here we are celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, and the church, in celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, we celebrate the veil. One of the things we celebrate is the veil being torn and people having direct access, right? And for far too long, the church has still stood at that medium and has not necessarily equipped people with the tools to directly access and connect with God themselves. They're still standing in the medium. And there's some people who don't know how to really connect with. I will say this in the same vein, is that far too often the church is still stood as the medium, right? And there's people who don't necessarily know how to engage God and experience God unless there's a preacher that's praying them into it, or a preacher that's preaching them into it, or if the worship leader hits a certain note, right? I don't necessarily know that churches have always equipped people with the tools that they need to have spiritual disciplines and to connect and engage with God independently on their own. We just wait for Sunday to come a lot of times in order to provide them that opportunity. But sometimes people are struggling, and right now people are struggling a whole lot, and it's more on the forefront in front of us than what it has been before. And people they never could always wait, but now it's more obvious that people can't always wait until Sunday to get a word from God to make it through. There might be a Tuesday, 3:12 p.m. Somebody needs to know at that moment how to engage in God themselves and how to connect with God themselves to make it through. And if the church is not necessarily discipling people in the capacity to engage in God themselves with that direct access, then how are we really equipping people to have these relationships? Again, I'm in the area of children and youth ministry, right? How are even parents doing that? How is the church equipping parents to be faith leaders of their children? What are they doing in order to make sure that we're restructuring this dynamic so that people really, really have those tools that are needed to do those things? And I think that if you want to start writing on the blank slate, one of those words you should rewrite is equipping. We should be teaching people how to engage in those conversations with God, how to have spiritual disciplines, how to connect with God when they can't physically get to you, as they can't right now. because there's always been a population of people who can't get to the church, the sick and the shut in, you know, and they're probably the ones who are the most excited about what their churches are doing. Hey, I'm finally still seen.
Yeah. I'll just jump in and echo a little bit of what both Candice and Larry have said. I think something that Candice began leaning in on is just this reality that we have to, and what COVID has done for us is ripped us from our traditions. And so there are folks who of course had, this is what church is, and this is what church looks like, and this is how church is going to operate, and this is what, and so for instance, those who have resisted in the past online worship and making that not just an aside, but making it something that we lean all the way into. Well, guess what? We got to work with the blank sheet of paper, because COVID has erased everything off of the page. And so we have to rip ourselves. And I think what's happening now that it's almost August, we're seeing how many churches and how many folks theologically, in their theological assessment of what church is, are struggling to make the slate blank. And now they're holding on to a theology that says church ain't church unless we are gathering on Sundays.
Yep.
Well, I think it's your tradition, and your tradition is informing your theology in that sense. And you're seeing folks struggle. You're seeing folks rush back to worship. You're flipping through your timeline and seeing mega churches with full pews and no masks. And I think a big part of it is not wanting to flip the page onto the back and begin with a blank slate. I think another thing also that both Candice and Larry said, and I just would unpack it for us, is what we had to start doing was thinking with the end in mind. What are we trying to create? So we're having discipleship meetings now. It's like, okay, well, now's a good time as any to completely overhaul our discipleship strategies. And, now we're thinking, okay, what type of disciple are we trying to, excuse the terminology, but what type of disciple are we trying to build? What is the end goal? We're not in a lab kind of building robots, but we do want to think through our discipleship with the end in mind. And then let's build our systems from here to that, with shooting for that goal. And so the question is, what do I do with this blank slate? I think it begins with an avatar. It begins with a goal. It begins with what am I shooting for? The classic Charlie Brown comic strip where Charlie Brown is doing archery and he hits the bullseye every time, and then the strip shows how he does it. He shoots the arrow and then he goes over with the red paint and paints the bullseye. It's like we gotta stop doing that. We gotta paint the goal, paint the bullseye, so that we know exactly what we're shooting for. And all of that shifts when a pandemic takes away from us the crutch that we've always leaned on, which for us has been the veil that Candice so eloquently said, is that Sunday worship experience that we put all our eggs in that basket.
Yep.
And now we're realizing that basket has dropped and we're struggling.
That's great. That's great. So now let me the connection pivot, right? And we talked about it, and I think I heard it. It's a pivot of a mind frame, right? So pivoting how you think about connecting with people. But one of the things that I wrote about in the article is that it is also a refocus of what effective means, right? So our church, right? Our pastor has, been blessed, and our church has been blessed, and he's empowered us to kind of lead. But one of the things he and I we talk all the time, but he and I talked through when this first started to happen was, what does church look like? But more so, what does discipleship look like, right? Because at this point, and I've heard you all say it, at this point, it's not a big deal. So my daughter is 5, right? My daughter is 5. She knows how old she is. She knows where she lives. If we're out, she can kind of find her way home because there's some stuff she knows now. When she becomes 15 and 25 and 30, she'll know those things more because she's been with me more, and she knows. So if we lose connection, she's grown enough that she can find her way home. I think that we're finding with this connection pivot. And what Pastor and I talked about was the fact that we need to work on discipleship, because to be honest, our people, if they were as connected as we wanted them to be to Christ, this shouldn't be that big a deal, because they already got their own prayer time. They already got their own time. They're already that actually our church should probably grow from this opportunity.
Yes, 100%. I would agree with you with so much. And it is a pivot. And you mentioned this word earlier, mindset. I was talking with one of our staff yesterday, and I said, describe your mindset when you're engaging with people. Because Dr. Bobby mentioned this, traditions and theology. We would say methods and mission.
Mm-hmm.
The mission, never compromise the mission, but always be willing to try new methods.
Yeah.
But what we created is sacred cows out of methods. And we start worshiping the method. And that becomes etched in stone. And so you take somebody who's been operating in a role and they're used to doing it a certain way to create success. And part of it's a personal achievement. But I was talking with one of the staff. I said, how do you see yourself? Like, describe your mindset. And this is a person ministry. And I see myself like an air traffic controller. And I'm just trying to get all these planes landed.
Okay.
And so they're approaching, I'm putting them in a new role because I've reassigned their job description.
Yeah.
You're now to follow up with people.
Yeah.
You're an air traffic controller. To Dr. Balby's point, what's the end of that? What kind of person does that produce?
Yeah.
Because now their conversations turn into efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And it's no longer about impact.
Mm.
An hour later, we were talking through the concept. I said, well, how would it change if you saw yourself as a father? What you just described.
Yeah.
Now you approach every conversation with a father that says, I don't have a conversation with my kid and they're there.
Yeah.
So it's a relationship that I lead them through life with.
Yeah.
And so to your point, I just can't reallocate people. I've got to reshape mindsets.
Mm.
My biggest challenge is I put you in a new role, but you've got an old mindset. You will produce old results unless you have a new mindset.
Yeah.
And so one of the biggest pivots where we fail as leaders is we will reassign, but not re-educate. And I will blame it on them when it's shallow leadership on my part because I never prepared them or set them up for success.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
And I think to get people to that mindset, there has to be some relational components there.
Yeah.
People have to trust and believe what it is that you are saying to them, right? And I think that in that, discipleship is relational. I think it's tremendously relational, right? So I think that if you're discipling people, you disciple people that you are in relationship with, or people are discipled by you if they are in relationship with you. I think it looks different for people who are preachers on stages, and people might hear you or that don't necessarily know you, right? But it's not really a one-on-one relationship. It's just you sitting at somebody's feet and them pouring into you. But I think that when we are truly people are at most likely open up and engage with somebody at your church and connect with somebody at your church. It does not have to be a pastor. I'm so sorry, all the pastors out there who feel they have to be that person, but it does not have to be a pastor, right? Because God has made us all fishers, right? Fishermen or women. Depending on your context, right? So, but I think that in order for people to connect with you, they have to feel as if you see them. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And when people feel like you see them when you are connecting with them where they are. So say if I have a basic need right now, say I've got 2 children and I'm having a hard time putting food on the table because they're home all day and they just eat like crazy people all day long, and I'm having a hard time doing that. But yet every time you call me, you just want to pour the scriptures down my throat. I can't hear anything that you're saying. Nope. Because you're the church are coming at me with just throwing the Bible down my throat. And I believe I stand on the Bible as the holy word of God. But if you can't connect with me in the place that where I am, relationally, and see where I am and help to connect me and meet my needs, then I can't hear you. Mm. And I think the way that the churches are being the church through those outreach and not necessarily taking the time to put their name on everything, the amount of money that you're about to step on some toes. The amount of money that you're spending putting your name on some hand sanitizer, take that same money, get some regular hand sanitizer, and take that money and give it to somebody as a food basket. You know, people do a lot of these things as a means of trying to, in the sake of outreach, but they're trying to really promote their church. Yeah. And when you're promoting when you're doing things for the sake of just outreach and just serving people, then you just want people to experience the tangible love of God. Yep. And that's where that discipleship begins. When people experience that tangible love of God in a felt need kind of way, then people, oh, that's the church that did that? I didn't realize that was their church, you know? And that's just what I stand on, what I believe. I think that when people don't feel like you're trying to just come at them for the sake of having, you know, for you to come to their church so you can give some money, you can tithe, and it can increase their numbers and all these kind of things. You know, when people feel like you're just meeting their need because you just want to share that love of God, then people are way more open to hearing what it is that you have to say in discipleship kind of capacity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, That's good. I want to. So with a part of what Candice it said in that moment when people understand that we care about their need, right? One of the sayings that I used to always say in youth ministry is that at the end of the day, God has given you a need, and as you put people in place to meet the need, He'll meet other needs. But the problem is when you don't put people in place, right? I have this term that I use all the time. It's not youth ministry unless the youth are leading the ministry. If they're not leading it, then take the TH off and it's you ministry, right? But a lot of churches and a lot of ministries like it when it's them leading it, right? And I heard Pastor Larry say it. I heard Pastor Bobby say it. I heard Reverend Candice say it. How do you encourage pastors and leaders to understand that in this season of connecting, right? When you used to be able to connect one-on-one with a couple people, you're not able to do that. Mm-hmm. And so because you're not able to connect with the people that you have to then spread yourself out to connect with other people, right? So what's the encouragement I think I'm asking for pastors to be able to know that they don't have to do everything. Like there's no way that you're going to be able to connect with all of your people now. There's no physical way to do it. You have to be able to share that.
Yeah.
Anybody?
For me, I can only speak for myself, but I bet I'm not the only one. I think pastors figure it out the hard way. And for me, I figured it out the hard way when I looked up mid-June, like halfway with my head through the wall because I'm burning myself out, trying to keep a church strong, you know, through a pandemic and wearing that responsibility on your own shoulders because everybody's looking to you and everybody's saying, hey, pastor, what are we going to do? And when are we coming back to church? And what's this going to be like? What's this? Is it Exodus 18 where Moses is ruling and Jethro comes to him and says, why are you doing this? And Moses' response was, well, the people are looking at me. And they come to me and I judge right from wrong. And so Moses' response to Jethro was, I got all this responsibility and I got all of these expectations. And from that, I get this prestige and this attention. And then and Jethro's like, you're not doing a good thing, dude. And praise God, Moses had a Jethro. For many of us, we went from March through midsummer, and then we looked up and realized we were worn out and the people still weren't connected. and so we kind of forced into this space where it was like, okay, I have to slow down. I have to empower my leaders. I have to raise up others. I have to train again. What I'm currently doing, I have to train again on spiritual gifts to make sure people are walking in the gifting that God gave them. Now I'm teaching and making sure that folks, okay, you have the spiritual gift of shepherding. Stop running from that. I'm not going to make you be a pastor. I just want you to use that gift because God specifically gifted you to help people grow in their walk with Jesus. And I need you to be an extension of the senior pastor, however you want to use that terminology, so that so that it's not just on me or on a group of people to make connections that no one person could do. It's the Jesus model. I'm going to pour into these 12 and then I'm going to send them out 2 by 2, or the Jesus model of, okay, we got 5,000 men plus their wives and children to feed. Okay, y'all organize it. Tell everybody sit down, 50s and 100s, and have them recline. That means they're prepared to receive. And then Jesus could have, in his Jesusness, broke up all the bread and the loaf and just tossed it up in the air, and it all would have fallen right in front of everybody. Jesus was Jesus enough to do something like that, but that's not what he did. He handed it to the disciples and said, all right, you feed them over there, and you feed them over there, and you feed them over there. And Jesus gets credit for feeding 5,000, but he, for some reason, decided to use the disciples to do so. And so it's our responsibility as senior leaders, when we are senior leaders, that if we're not raising up and empowering others to do the work, then we're going to wear ourselves out and we're not going to get the work done.
That's good.
Preach, Pastor Bob.
Right.
Well, I ain't been able to shake him and rock him since like March, so I mean,
Just shake your computer, yo.
Yeah. I love it. I don't know. You guys are probably a whole lot holier than me. I think one of the things that it's really challenging every leader in this ministry and around the world is the idea of where their sense of worth and value comes from. Because when we get done with this, all 3 of us are going to look at Reverend Russ and say, how'd we do? Did we do okay? You never graduate out of that.
Yeah.
And what I realized is my motives will never be 100% pure, but am I being honest? So here's what I've had to realize in this season. If I'm unhealthy, they will be unhealthy.
That's right.
And how many pastors, leaders are getting their validation through social media, through comments on Facebook?
Yeah.
I can only have an unhealthy ministry when I'm an unhealthy leader. So what I had to do, when I started the year, is I had to create 2 scoreboards. And this is something my pastors really helped us on. I got to have a private scoreboard, and then I got to have a scoreboard that I've worked on with my boss. Okay. The private scoreboard is I have to know how I win in areas that nobody else will ever see. So I got an album on my phone. And when I do something that the Holy Spirit prompts me and I respond in obedience, I take a picture of it and I don't post it on social media. I don't show anybody else. I put it in my trophy case. That's how I know I won.
That's good.
That's good. Oh, that's stolen.
I get so unhealthy when I live for everybody else's validation.
Wow.
Like we will, and in this season of silence, the echo chamber only grows.
Yes.
So how do I create a scoreboard that I can put points on that absolutely matter in the places where I need them to? So I got to have a private scoreboard that nobody else works on. If anybody watching this, if you only hear me say one thing, find a scoreboard that matters. And you got to know how you put points on the board. Okay. I got the private scoreboard, but now I got to have a scoreboard with my boss, my supervisor. Every single one of us have a responsibility to go to our supervisor and say, how do I win in this season? What does it look like? And some of the wins that I'm sitting down with our leaders and campus pastors in this ministry are, you won't know because it's going to take a long time for the seed to grow.
That's good.
And the win in this season is not to get through your 60 calls. The win in this season is to make one person feel seen and known. You used that phrase earlier, Reverend Candice, to make him feel seen.
Yeah.
Did I make somebody feel seen and known today? If we can do that, dude, we're going to win.
Amen.
That's significance right there. But it's got to start in me. If I'm driven for somebody else's approval, I'm going to be driven. And the leading motivators, I don't get rid of that motivation. I can just put it a little bit further down on the list. That's maturing.
Yeah.
You don't get rid of it. And I hate preachers that preach in absolutes. Do it all for the glory of God. Come on, be quiet. Shut up. You don't do that. Because there's always a part of me in it. But can I just get that a little bit lower on the list?
Amen.
Because I don't know if that helps, but that's just a real struggle.
It absolutely does. And I'll just to throw this in, Larry, as somebody who preaches every Sunday, to highlight what you're saying, that what we senior pastors don't have anymore is the handshaking line, where everybody comes by and says, "Pastor, what a wonderful word. Oh my gosh, that message changed my life. And oh my goodness, you're such an awesome preacher." And now we're preaching to empty rooms and no amens and no handshake line afterwards. And now what's getting exposed, that we thrive off of that, off of that feedback, that immediate feedback. And now we're living in a bubble, in a where we're not preaching to a room full of people, we're preaching to a camera bulb. Yeah. And now and that camera bulb, no matter how good you preach, that camera lens does not say amen. Nope. It don't clap, it don't holler, it don't stand up, it does not respond to the organ playing. That camera lens does not care how good you preach it. And so when you're a preacher, leader, pastor who admittedly thrives off of that energy, and now that energy is gone, how do you go back to the How do you go back to the vine? How do you go back to the real source of your value and your worth and say, Jesus, I need you to affirm my preaching, because right now it's just me and my 9-year-old who's like, Daddy, you preached real good. And he only listened to the last like 6 minutes of the whole sermon. And so that's all I got. That's all I got. And now I'm face to face with Jesus saying, Jesus, I need you to fill my cup, because I've been filling it with the wrong stuff for the last however many years. I've been the guy who preaches on Sundays.
So I had an experience. Let me share one quick story to illustrate that point. A couple years ago, I preach at Elevation. My pastor, he's the greatest preacher on the planet, Pastor Stephen Furtick. He is one of the leading voices in the church world. And so he gives me a Sunday to preach on his pulpit. It's the biggest pulpit on the stage. I preach the Saturday night worship experience. I walk off after preaching, and my phone is getting lit up with direct messages, and there was only one that mattered. And I never got a text message from my pastor Saturday night. I go home Saturday night, I'm thinking he hates this, because he watched it and he hated it. So I stay up all night reworking my sermon. I preached the next morning, Sunday morning, 9:30. I give it all I got. I stayed up the whole night. I get back, no text message after the 9:30. I'm like, oh gosh, he really hated it. I preached the 11:30. By the time I got home after church, in my head, I was fired and my kids were in prison. Like, he texted me Wednesday and he said, I just watched your sermon. Thank you so much for giving me the first weekend off in more than a decade where I didn't have to worry about it. You did great.
Wow.
Silence was the greatest compliment he could have ever given. I didn't know how to interpret it.
That is awesome. That is absolutely great. That is absolutely great. With that, because we're only taught one way, right? Most times we're only taught one way. And so what you all are exposing, right, is from Reverend Candice to being seen, to understanding that the preacher has that. But then Pastor Larry, with the whole fact that the guy you were looking to trusted you enough not even to look at you. Right. That I taught my daughter how to ride a bike a couple months back now. Right. And it took COVID to do it, because I should have done it last summer. But last summer was engagement.
Blessing of COVID.
Me too.
And
my Sunday too.
It's crazy. And so it took. But now when she rides, I don't have to look at her. The first couple times I'm nervous, but the last time she got it. And that's not because you trust, but pastors have to get, and leaders have to get that level of trust in God, is what I'm hearing us say. Because if we're going to pivot our connection with people, we got to pivot our connection with God.
Amen.
Yeah.
How we receive what we're receiving.
Amen.
And I think that this is so rich, such good conversation. And I think that that scoreboard piece that you mentioned, Larry, and that whole validation piece that you just mentioned, Russ, is so important, I think. And a huge part of the reason why I think it's important for us is because there's so much within our faith that is not quantitative.
Mm-hmm.
It's just unmeasurable. You can't really measure and say, you know, I mean, there's all kind of spiritual gifts tests and blah blah, but can't really measure how much you have grown as a person.
Yeah.
You know, and how much you can't measure how much you're putting your faith in God more from this year to the last year. It's just not measurable, you know. So sometimes we seek outside voices to say to confirm that we are growing and we are advancing and we are doing the things that God wants us to do, and we're doing it right. So, you know, it's natural for us to seek those things because, like I said, because things are not quantitative. I think the challenge comes in when we're looking for those numbers. And a lot of times within the church, we look for those numbers within offering, attendance, baptism, salvation.
Yeah.
So we gravitate towards the things that we can measure in order to kind of officially stamp and say, hey, we're doing well, right? Because, you know, the numbers don't lie, right? The numbers are going up. But sometimes there's a difference between things swelling and things growing, you know? You know, things that are swelling grow, things that are healthy grow. Yeah. And how do we define what that growth is? Is it swelling or is it growth? You know, if it's swelling, it's an infection, you know, and it's going to explode eventually. But when there's healthy growth, it's going to grow. And when things are, you know, where there is health, there is eventual growth. That's something that I've always lived by. Where there's health, there's eventual growth. However, that growth isn't always translated to numeric growth. Within the numbers of people when it comes like attendance, baptism, and all that kind of stuff, and offering. But that growth can be spiritual growth of the people.
Yeah.
And as if we're noticing spiritual growth of the people, then I think that's something that as a pastor, we ought to say, God, I'm still trying. I'm still doing your work, God. Yes, thank you, God, for the validation that I'm still doing your work and that I might be doing it kind of all right, or maybe
No, that's good. That's good. And I think to go back to talking about what you said, Reverend Candice, but back to what Pastor Larry said when we were talking about the white sheet, right? So that means then that for some of us, our metrics, right? You have to have a metric, something you're goaling for.
Yep.
The spiritual growth of the people has to be on there. So salvation is no longer just it. There has to be some other things that you put in place so you're able to see how people are growing. And so you have to talk with your team about what that looks like. You have to talk and pray, obviously, to figure out what's the direction God wants you in the church to kind of go on. So I think that's great. I know we got a couple more minutes, and I don't want to. It's been great. One question that I want to ask before we go into the last round that I want everybody to kind of talk about. But so we've talked about connecting and connecting as it relates to our people, but how are we connecting with leaders? And I'll preface it and let me start it. Because for us, so Sunday morning, of course, the weekend was the thing, right? And so we've had a couple hundred leaders who serve. One of my main roles was to serve the leaders. And so I'm checking in with the ushers and the greeters and the parking lot and the nursery and the kids church and those who serve Fishes and Loaves. You know, African American church, we have a fellowship hall, so we eat. So checking in with those people, like doing, and this has shifted it now. But there's still ways that we have to figure out how we connect. So obviously we're doing some Zooms, we're doing some Facebook groups where we can now because it's social distancing. We are meeting outside in a social distance kind of manner just to kind of lay eyes, as the senior saint would say, on you. But what does connection look like in this pivot with your ministry leaders? Anybody want to grab it?
Well, there's a difference between having a conversation and building a relationship.
Good.
And it all depends on how my mindset is. If I've got a list of 60 names I'm just supposed to call, those are not people.
That's good.
But to build a relationship,
that's good.
It's one of those things that each conversation builds on itself.
That's good.
And what I do is I see you and I notice you. And the next time I talk to you, I pull in previous conversation into the present conversation. And it shows that, wow, Reverend Russell saw me. He remembers I got 4 kids.
That's good.
And so we've got to understand, like to Reverend Candice's point, like, hey, you're 37% as better this year as a mom. Like, I can't measure that. Like,
Right.
there's like, the most important things are the hardest things to measure.
Sure.
Yeah.
But what I can do is, how do I build a relationship? So here's what I teach very, very practically. If you've got 12 people that you're overseeing, do you have a portfolio on those 12 people? Meaning, have I sat down and wrote down, have I ever asked them, what is the most effective way to communicate to you? Because a shallow leader treats everybody the same.
That's good.
But one who really sees people says, oh, Reverend Russell actually likes text messages better. Dr. Bobby, he prefers a voice memo. Now, Reverend Candice, she only wants phone calls. Do I adopt my style to make you feel seen? Or is it a one size fits all?
That's good.
So what I've got to learn how to do is how do people feel seen, not how do I communicate? And so there are so many that are going to watch this that, well, I send the email out every Thursday and nobody responds to it. And they stink as people. They're bad people. No, you're a crappy leader. Like, really, like, and we blame the people rather than, I had a teacher in 5th grade tell me, she goes, there's no such thing as bad students. I just haven't figured out how to teach them yet.
Mm-hmm.
Best teacher. Why? Because she made me feel seen and heard.
Amen.
And so what I want to tell people is with leaders, I need to teach you how to build a portfolio of your flock.
Yeah.
They know I know the condition of my flock, the scripture says.
Yeah.
But I've got to do homework. I've got to get with God. I got to listen to you. I got to practice active listening. All those things we can coach. But if I see myself as a manager, this is just 60 calls to get through. If I see this as if I see myself as a father, these are 60 kids. I need to see how my kids are doing.
That's great. That's good. That's good.
Yeah. And I say, yeah, I do. I want to piggyback on exactly what you're saying there, Pastor Larry. You know, and I think in that, when you see them, then you're sensitive to your ask of them in this season.
Yes.
Because some people are quite overwhelmed with being quarantining, being at home. They have children. They're still trying to work. You know, and I don't know what kind of volunteers or leaders you're necessarily talking about, whether they're staff leaders or whether they're, volunteer leaders. But whether they work a separate job, then that volunteers, they're working a full-time job. They might be parents, and then school's going to kick in soon, so they might also be homeschooling. So just the stressors of all of that. Or if they work at the church, they're leaders at the church, and they are maybe working from home, and they have children at home, they have families, they have responsibilities, or how they are personally experiencing this pandemic and how it might be impacting them, the stressors or the anxiety that it's producing upon them. Now, I get that there's a certain degree of the church work that still has to get done, right? Is the business aspect of it. But if there's someone who is overwhelmed and is experiencing this pandemic in a tremendously challenging way, then perhaps as leaders within the church, maybe we should take a minute and pastor them and be sensitive to the requests that we have upon them. And not be looked down upon them if they are late to a meeting. You're at home. Why are you late to this Zoom meeting? Maybe I was busy, and doing something with my family who is still here,
Had to make fish sticks for 3 dudes who was hungry.
Right.
Exactly. Fish sticks and fries and applesauce. If you would have been over here making the fish sticks and the fries, I'd have been on time for the meeting.
Yep.
Facts. And then also now my kids begin school on Monday. They begin school on Monday. Wow. And it's virtual. So I'm taking off all next week. And that's intentional because my husband's a teacher. And he's expected to be, in front of a camera like this from 9 to 2 teaching. So what does that do for my house?
Man.
So I'm taking a week off just to be able to process it and figure it all out for us. And leaders should do the same thing when it comes to their people.
Great. I wrote this statement down before we hopped on. I was thinking about you, Reverend Russell, and here's the only thing that got put on my spirit to speak. Uncertainty is a space where offense easily grows.
Mm.
And we are living in a season of so much uncertainty. Everything that Reverend Candice just said is a season of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And when we have uncertainty, we lash out, we don't respond. As a leader, a shallow leader is easy to offend. And what happens is, when can I start seeing myself as a father and see them as a person rather than a manager who only sees their behavior?
Yeah. That's good.
And we will so rebuke behavior rather than sit with the person. Those things are only going to escalate, and it's compound interest that is building up daily. And if we don't understand, to Pastor or Reverend Candice's point there, that we're called to shepherd the people, we will be rebuking people that need to be ministered to.
Wow.
And it is epidemic. It is compound interest, and it is doubling daily.
Yeah.
And the amount of people that are absolutely hurting. And 3 months ago, it wasn't exposed. Now it is a crater.
Yeah.
But if we don't see people, we will simply impugn their behavior.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's absolutely great. One of my mentors, who's actually going to be on, Pastor Adam Durso. He's going to be on the session we're doing on pivoting your self-care. And that's all he hit me the other day on, like, yo, I know you're doing all this stuff, but when you get out of this, you're supposed to be better, not worse. But if you don't see yourself, if you don't see people, like Reverend Candice said, like being able to do that in that way, it's going to be scary. And I hate to say it, I think that a larger majority of pastors and leaders are actually in that space, in another space.
Yeah.
So that's a concern. So I'm gonna do the last part of this is always 3 questions that I want you to think about, but I want you to answer, and you can do them all together, because I want, while I believe this conversation has been helpful for those who are watching and listening on Connections. The question is how, the second question is resources, and the last question is future. So around ministry pivot, how, right? So if somebody's listening right now, small church, big church, large church, medium-sized church, what are some pivots that they may need to make according to their connection now? In that, what are some resources, like some tools? Like, I know for our church, every church is using Zoom, Facebook groups in terms of connecting. I'm using Slack for some people. We're using some levels of Evernote. We're using Google Docs, like on Supreme right now. What does that look like? And then what do we think the future of connecting looks like? The future of connecting in, I know some churches are opening up and opening up limited. I know they're doing some, but what do we think that level of connection looks like? So the first one is the how, right? I really want to be practical, right? Then if in your how you have some resources that you use, like I use these 3 apps every week. Like, if you're not using these, some free, some paid for, and then the pivot of future. What do we think the future looks like? Anybody want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go to get it out of the way, because then I'll leave everybody on a good note when these really correct whatever heretical thing I'm about to say. Let me lump all 3 of those really into one, and I'll give a statement to summarize them. I'll say this: personal is powerful. And so from a ministry standpoint, my daughter is outside the window at my office, and she's waving. She's a 12-year-old. She just got done volunteering in the church. I'm so proud.
Awesome.
Cheetos. But from a how standpoint, I would teach us all to do well to understand the widow whose 2 sons were being taken by the creditors coming to settle accounts. She goes to the prophet, and he simply asks her, "What do you have?" And every house has everything they need to accomplish everything as God has called them to do. When we take inventory of what's in our house.
That's good.
And here's where we go wrong in ministry is, if I go to the pantry of our ministry, all these bottles and cans are on it. And what I have done and what we've done is we've mislabeled so many of them. And we will look at what's on the pantry And because of the label somebody else has put on, or they put on themselves, or we put on it, we don't use it because we don't think it applies to this season. So personal is powerful. How do we actually see people and see what they have?
That's good.
Okay. And then from the future of it, it's personal is powerful. Here's the thing. If you've got 50 people in your ministry, or you've got 5,000 people in your ministry, your ability to shepherd is your ability to see the individual. So if we ever get too big to ask, how do you best feel seen and known? We stopped our growth.
That's great.
Now we're not into the growth thing. We're into the, what did you say earlier, Reverend Candice? Swelling? Okay. So again, if you got 50 people, practically, if I treat my wife like everybody else in the world, I don't know my wife. To know the people you shepherd says, how do you feel seen and known? And I will adapt my style, because it's not about me being what I say, it's about you hearing. So whether that's 50 or 5,000, start with the people and say, how do you feel seen and known? How can I best follow up with you? What can I do for you in this season? And we really listen, and we put it in our database, and we write it down, and we do it. We don't just send them emails like everybody else. Personal is powerful.
That's great. That's great. That's great. That's great.
That's good.
Candice, Bobby, which one of y'all gonna go?
Who wants to go after that? Yeah, I'll just slide in, the question about resources. As you said, so many of us have been using Zoom and other resources. Our church, there are millions of softwares that allow you to keep, members and roles connected, etc. I feel like the resources matter a little bit less than the goals. Because whatever you're trying to do, there's a resource that does that proficiently. And there are churches all over the country who use resources that vary. Of course, Zoom is great, and there are other versions of Zoom, and many of us have tried them all, right? I think the resource, how the specific resource matters less than what am I trying to accomplish? And coming face to face with the reality that maybe I haven't really been accomplished before the second Sunday in March. Maybe I wasn't doing that great of a job at accomplishing what I'm trying to accomplish because I was so settled in the method that was available to me.
Yeah, that's good.
And so now it's okay, what am I trying to do, and how in tune am I to the people I'm trying to do it with? Right. And that way, if I was having this conversation with our youth pastor the other day, because he was like, oh man, the teenagers aren't as excited about Zoom as they would be about this or that, and they're not on Facebook, and it's hard to connect on Instagram Live because you can't keep track of it. And so we're having this conversation about how to stay engaged online with teenagers. And I think the conclusion of our conversation was, hey man, what are their numbers? Text them, call them, because if they're serious, if you're discipling them, and if they're serious about their discipleship, they'll get on Zoom or anything else. It's just a matter of, do they feel connected to you? And do they feel like this is something that they want to do? And do they feel like these are people that really care about them and give them a release from surely the feeling of isolation and being kind of walled into their homes, etc. And so let's talk. For me, it's okay. We can figure out the resources once we figure out the end goal and what we're trying to accomplish. As far as the future is concerned, I'm guessing here that the future is going to look like a hybrid of sorts, in a sense. I feel like the pendulum, COVID has shifted the pendulum all the way to the opposite extreme for us, so that it's forcing us to be proficient in digital connection, forcing us to be proficient in connecting with people in unique ways where they don't have to come to the building. I think COVID is not just doing this, as you said earlier, Russ, COVID is not just doing this in the church, in our industry, excuse the terminology, industry, but it's also doing it in every other industry. where what company was it that decided that they're not even going to be counting hours. I read this article. I can't think of the company that decided they're not going to be counting hours in office even when COVID is over. They're going to be measuring productivity not by the time clock and how much time they spend in the office, as much as how well they are accomplishing their goals. And so people are realizing, okay, I don't have to pay all this overhead for this office building. I don't have to. The box stores are realizing, hey, I can close half of these stores and still sell as much stuff here. My dry cleaner stopped being a space, a physical space. They figure, hey, it costs me less money to have one space and drive all these clothes around to all of my customers. And so, and so everything is shifting. I think it's shifting to an extreme that after COVID begins to settle, whatever that means, is going to settle into this beautiful hybrid that allows us to worship in person, but also worship in other expressions, to be able to see each other in face to face, but also get used to environments like this. But a lot of folks are appreciating the fact that, if parents like us who have kids, I used to have to go to church for life group. Well, guess what? I could be home in life group cooking dinner and making, I don't have to find a babysitter or leave my husband to burn the house down while the ladies are in life group, and so things are changing, I believe, so that we're going to settle. I think the best churches, the most effective churches are going to be in that hybrid space.
That's good. That's good. Reverend Candice?
Yeah. I don't know if this answers any of the question, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Sorry, bro. But I think that for many, this pandemic is quite eye-opening in a lot of ways, and it's eye-opening for the laity and for the clergy alike, and also of the role and the responsibility of the church. So I think the lay and the clergy are looking at the role and the responsibility of the church in different ways. I think that some churches are realizing that live streaming is essential. Some who weren't live streaming before are now wondering why they never took the time to do it. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a whole slew of people who are growing to love the way that their communal worship looks right now in their home. There's some people who are craving connectivity, but I think there's a whole lot who are liking how it looks within their home. Maybe it's for the sake of the ability to multitask or to church hop. I don't know about y'all, but I right now I'm going to like 5 churches on Sundays, and I'm not watching the entire service of any of them. Just being honest, I think there might be some people who are like that, but I think that it's something that churches, and I don't know, how exactly I would probably have to process, what this really looks like. But I think that it's something that churches should lean into and not shy away from. Or judge or consider to be sacrilegious, and just can think about, if this is the way that people are engaging, why are they engaging like this, and how can we adjust what it is that we're doing to connect with them in this capacity?
No, I think that's great, and I think that we have to look at how we're connecting. But I also think that when we do, to all of your points, when this moves into a next space, I think we're going to be better if we learn the lessons during this season.
Amen.
If we listen to people the way we should see, we're actually going to be way better. Because I've used the term since we've been in, since after the second or the third week, the second or third week when we first got into all of this. When I was trying to figure out who was doing what, and I realized, don't nobody know what they're doing. We just got to figure it out. That was the biggest breather for me. But then the realization was, God has moved us from a pool to an ocean. And now it's not just connecting in an effective way with our people, it's connecting with the world. And so when we get through this season, and then we can connect with our people on face-to-face, however we have to do it, however many times we have to do it, to then have that advantage and also the advantage of what we learn from connections, I can't imagine what that next season for the church is going to look like. I think discipleship, I think growth, I think all of that is just going to look really fruitful. And I am excited about it. So I thank y'all for getting on. I thank y'all.
One more.
Yep.
1 second. Shameless plug. So if anyone out there is struggling with your children and youth ministry, check out Orange, thinkorange.com. We have a lot of really, really cool resources that we put together to help people uniquely in this time with their churches, children and youth ministries, so that population can be ministered to still. So thinkorange.com.
No, that's great. We use Orange, and then we supplement with other stuff. That's great. So actually, that's where I was going. Any last minute pieces about kind of where you are, what you're doing, how people can connect? They see your Instagram handles, and then if you're listening online, you'll have show notes. You'll be able to see all of that on there. But specifically for you all, for Candice, for Bobby, for Larry, any last minute kind of how they can connect with you, how they can build after this.
Yeah, I'll start it again because I want to leave you on the best note. I'll leave these other two experts to really leave you on a good thought. I just think what I used to think was my biggest limitation, not having a lot of ministry experience, actually is my greatest benefit. And so don't start disqualifying yourself just because you don't know how to navigate the season. Nobody is. As Reverend Russell said, we're all making it up as we go. And so don't disqualify yourself because you might feel like I might be too old or our ministry can't change and we can't do that. Like, please don't label yourself and limit what God wants to do through you. And so your scarcity might actually be the greatest gift for God in this next season.
That's great. That's great.
Amen. I would just end by saying one of the things that I've been trying to do over the past few weeks is with the benefit of technology, seeing if I could disciple through a camera as if I'm discipling one person, and then opening that exposure to as many people as possible. So if they want to plug in, they can. And so I got folks that I'm discipling face to face, but then, hey, what would I do if I could sit down with somebody every day or every other day and just walk through scriptures and encourage them? So I've just been trying to do that and use the tool of social media to do that. And so on Instagram, on Facebook, any social media you got, TikTok, whatever, is at Dr. B. Manning. It's all the same. Would love to connect with you, but just connecting with people, I think is vital in this time.
Awesome. Reverend Candice?
I already did it. So you can just do what I did earlier and insert it here. So y'all just stop, rewind, and play, and then fast forward back to this space.
They're going to hear all of that because
that was on purpose.
I appreciate, but again, so let me just say, right? I appreciate you all for getting on, Candice, Bobby, Larry. I appreciate you all for getting on. Thank your families for allowing you this time to be able to get on. As I think my family, my daughter just went upstairs already, so I'm gonna go and kiss her good night. But thank y'all again, and excited about who will hear this and who will be encouraged by this, and just looking forward to seeing what God does as ministries pivot their connection. If you're watching, you're listening, please make sure that you subscribe. I don't think I said it in the beginning, but please subscribe so that we can get you this content. And then if you have any questions, you can go to ministrypivot.com, and then we'll be able to try to answer those questions. And then again, they're going to be show notes so you can contact these experts, because all of them, even though they threw that word around like they weren't, they actually are pretty dope. And so their contact information will be on there as well for you to be able to contact them. But whatever you do, I think what you heard from us on today is start with something and start blank. You don't have to do it the way it's always been done. Just connect and know. And Pastor Larry, I'm telling you, I'm pulling that. Keep your private scoreboard. Because the truth is, even when you had the people in public, some of them folk were lying to you anyway.
Yeah, amen.
I know they were lying to me sometimes. So at the end of the day, though, we're praying for you and praying with you. Thanks again for joining, and God bless.